I see rejection all the time. You put something out there, it doesn't work. A client doesn't want to book you for some reason. We have to kind of really embrace that as not being an indication that you failed. And I get really inspired by the story of Thomas Edison and the light bulb. How many filaments, how many light bulbs he had to make? Hundreds before he finally got the one to work. And now, his invention changes the world. Because if you constantly act out of shame or fear, you're likely going to continue walking in a similar path.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do yourself a favor and give us a follow because I don't want you to miss any of the amazing guests we have this year. Without further ado, we're going to get right into this one. Shang Savedra, someone I've been keeping up with. This has saved my sense. I've been following you for quite some time and now we finally have you on the show. I'm super excited to just have this conversation with you today, but for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to get to know you or get to see you yet, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Thank you, John, for having me. So excited to be here and be able to tell your audience my story. My name is Shang. I am a multimillionaire who lives life in a joyful and frugal way. And the way that I got here was through essentially extreme frugality. It's making as much money as you can, spending as little as you can, and investing the difference. I'm very happily situated now in Southern California. I'm married and I got 2 little boys and just living a quiet life. And I feel like that's what wealth is all about.
Yeah, amazing. Living your life by design, as we say where I'm from, life by design. So take us back to little Shang. What was she like? What was it, your journey growing up, your childhood like specifically? What was the topic of money, finances, wealth? What was that like in your household growing up?
So I'm a only child of 2 Chinese parents who lived through what's now known as the Cultural Revolution. It was a very, very violent time in China when communism took hold. And my parents, grew up dirt poor. They were so poor that sometimes all they ate was variations on sweet potato for a whole month. Like that's how little food there was. Thankfully, I was not alive when all of that chaos occurred. I was born in China as well. And my parents obviously wanted to leave for better opportunities. So we spent most of my childhood moving, constantly moving. Like we went from China to Europe. I lived in 2 European countries. I had to adjust to new languages, new cultures constantly. By the time that I landed in the United States when I was 10 years old, I had changed locations like 10 times. And so even though we didn't talk about money, we were constantly talking about change and adapting to change and being immigrants and being strangers and just trying to figure it out because that was hard.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. So for me, I moved once and literally it was there's like a big park. It was from one side of the park to the other side of the park. So that's as far as I've ever moved in my life. So before we really step right into the conversation, just walk us through that a little bit. For some of us that haven't had the experience of, moving and having to relocate, not only to a different city or a different neighborhood, but to entirely different countries. What was that like? To entirely different time zones, different continents. What was that like?
I can only imagine now because I didn't fully understand moving until I was maybe closer to 6 or 7 was when it actually hit home. Wow, you're moving. You're changing your house. You have to change friends. So, you got to learn a new language that your parents also don't know how to speak. So it really feels like when you enter a new classroom in a new school, I'm an alien. I really am. And I just had to figure it out myself because my parents didn't really know how to do it either. They were walking through the thickness of it all with me. So looking back, it sounds so incredible, but looking back, I think it was really hard. I was always outcast, didn't keep any friends. That was the hardest part. My friends were from other countries. I couldn't really keep in contact with them. There was no email back then. You had to snail mail, actual write letters and put postage stamps on it. I didn't have money for postage stamps. So it was lonely. It was definitely very lonely. I would not recommend it, but I think it helps build up a lot of resilience, openness to change, risk-taking, which then became a lot more prominent later on in life as I became an adult.
That's so amazing. You were able to make it through that. And so now walk us through it a little bit. So now you finally land in the States, you're 10 years old, right? What was that like acclimated to the US? When did the concepts of money kind of start coming into play? Were you like a natural entrepreneur, or did you kind of work your way into it?
No, I don't see myself as a natural entrepreneur, although I think most people, when they look at me, would say, yes, you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it seems like that.
I was always good at math. So what I loved about my academic progress was that even though getting a new language is really hard, math is math. Numbers are always the same. They don't change going from one language to another. And so I always buzzed and like whizzed through all my math quizzes and all of that. So I understood numbers very early on. My parents didn't really talk money to me until I would say when I was in high school. And sometimes I would see them budgeting at the kitchen table. I would hear my dad negotiating with the phone company, the cable company to lower our phone bill, to lower our cable costs. My parents always did their own yard work. And I would like every now and then I'd hear my dad complain about how much it costs to like do yard work or have someone else do it. So bit by bit, I understood that we spent very little money. Now, funny thing was, I was deadly convinced that my parents and I were poor. I was like, we live in a tiny house on the edge of a really good town, but on the edge of town, all my friends had bigger houses. We drove like the crappiest cars. We never ate out. I never got new clothes until I was really, really hoping to up my fashion. And so I was really convinced we were poor. So I would say it became a huge surprise to me when I was applying to colleges that my dad said, you could go to any college you want. I'm going to pay for it all. I was like, with what money? And it turns out my parents have been saving and investing this entire time.
Oh my goodness. That reminds me of the book, The Millionaire Next Door. And it really goes to show that a lot of the times the people that are the wealthiest are usually the people that also look the most normal, the most quote unquote regular. That's like people that you would normally never expect. It's the everyday citizen that is low key like sitting on a lot of bank, right, in their bank account. And so let me ask you, so you go into college, right? You're studying, and I'm assuming it's something that's related to numbers. Is that a safe estimate?
So I went to Harvard. And I really wanted to go into business because I was like, it's a legit way to make a lot of money. Harvard, being the liberal artsy college it is, they didn't have a business major. The closest you could get was probably economics or statistics. And so I decided to major in economics. I wouldn't say that it was my strong point, but it made the most sense for what I wanted to do.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. So you get into economics, and then what did you learn there that applied to what you're doing now? For me personally, when I was taking an economics class, I ended up dropping out of college midway because of the pandemic. But for me, economics was, well, at least economics 101, 1101 was my microeconomics class. And in there, I learned about supply and demand. And I learned about, how if you put the right incentives in place, people are actually very predictable and things like that. And that was probably one of my only very, very useful classes that I've taken in my years of schooling. So you get into Harvard, you study economics. Now, where does your journey go from there? Where does it lead you? You graduate from Harvard, I'm assuming. Where does you go? When do you go from there?
A very typical path for Harvard graduates, especially those that study economics. Sorry, my baby is very excited and mommy's talking about economics in the background. Is you either go into investment banking or management consulting because those companies recruit from the top schools and they typically look for students who had my background. Now, I totally recognize that that's a huge point of privilege that companies were coming to me. But yeah, my first time applying for internships, by the way, when I was a sophomore, it took me over 100 rejections. So I've also had my fair share of dirt to eat in the meantime. And I decided, ultimately, I was able to land a job in management consulting on my way out. And that actually formed the majority of my life in the 9-to-5 sense. And I did a lot of entrepreneurship in my 5 to 9 offline sense.
Yeah, I love that. And so let me ask you, let's take a quick pause right here. So 100 rejections. Let's talk about that really quickly and dive down before we really get into save my senses and how that was able to blow up. Yeah. So 100 rejections, whereas what it took for you to get your first internship.
Yeah.
Now, I feel personally, so me being in the younger generation, my generation is getting worse and worse at handling rejection. And there's so many factors that play, I feel, but we're getting worse at rejection. People don't realize how hard it takes. And there's this quote that says, tough men, weak men breed hard times breed strong men breeds easy times, and then easy times breed weak men. And then the cycle continues, right? And so I feel,
I gotta steal that.
Yeah, definitely go for it, steal it. And so I heard that from somewhere else. I forget where I get these quotes from, but that one, I think I heard on a Facebook video one time. And when I heard that, I was like, wow. So what it looks like right now is we've had easier times, at least my generation, right? And we haven't had to deal with the Cold War, or, most of us don't even remember 9/11. I was literally born in the 90s before. So that doesn't even exist in my memory bank.
Okay.
So it's like a lot of people in my generation, it's like, we haven't really had to deal with too much. I mean, we had the pandemic, but aside from that, we didn't have to deal with too much. So it's like, wow, what does it take to get over rejection? How important is it in getting rejection, especially for those of us who want to get into entrepreneurship and start running our own business?
I mean, you kind of have to accept rejection as given in entrepreneurship. So I'll just quickly explain what I've done as an entrepreneur. I've run a wedding photography company. I've also dabbled in some internet startups, and then currently Save My Sense is my most recent entrepreneurship iteration, so to speak, where I teach people personal finance. I see rejection all the time. You put something out there, it doesn't work. A client doesn't want to book you for some reason. You put money into an advertising channel, it doesn't give you anything. And we have to kind of really embrace that as not being an indication that you failed. And I get really inspired by the story of Thomas Edison and the light bulb. The invention of the light bulb. You know how many filaments, how many light bulbs he had to make? Hundreds before he finally got the one to work. And now, his invention changes the world. And so I realized to do anything life-changing, anything worthwhile, anything new.
Wow. So now you're helping people from their very first dollar. And that's exactly where most of my audience is. And I'm still on more of the beginning stages myself. And I share that every month. I do one of my, my walk-in insert month episodes where I just share what I've been able to accomplish, what were some of my cons in that month and stuff. Because for me, I knew I wanted to, be transparent and document my journey while I was on the way to where I'm headed, instead of waiting for me to finally get there to start giving back. And so I love the fact that you're on, because as I said, most of my audience, we're trying to save our first dollars, right? Or maybe our first $100 or 1,000 or 10,000, right? We're trying to break these bigger numbers. And so where does one begin? For someone that's, still in their, early 20s, where does one begin when it comes to personal finance? Because there's so many different rabbit holes you can head down.
The very first thing you got to do is save an emergency fund, because that allows you to break the paycheck to paycheck cycle. And it also prevents you from having crappy things happen in life that land you in credit card debt. And this could be anything. Usually your car breaks down, or if you have a pet, your pet gets sick, or a number of things. And to break that, I think is the hardest part to do, because that can come from deep-rooted things that existed when you were growing up. So I mentioned how I went through a lot of change and a lot of moving, and I saw my parents being frugal. So I was like, okay, they don't spend a lot of money. I too will not spend a lot of money. But many people don't grow up with that. You might grow up with parents or parental figures who also do not know how to handle money. And then so it could be like feast or famine. I've heard of a lot of people whose parents have no idea where money is going. And then I also know of a lot of people who grew up with parents who struggled so much with money, worrying all the time, that they kind of want to go the other way. You're like, I never want to do that again. But you've also never seen someone be good with money. And so you try to do the opposite of what your parents did, but you don't quite know what it is. And maybe you take it too far to the other side. So I think learning to break that paycheck to paycheck cycle also comes with coming to terms with what your childhood experience was and how your family related to money, and owning that history and not being ashamed of whatever it was. Because if you constantly act out of shame or fear, you're likely going to continue walking in a similar path as your family did.
Yeah, and 100%. And it's one of those things that's so hard to navigate, because a lot of that stuff happens to us and affects us at a time and an age where we're still too young to even realize it. So by the time we are old enough to realize it, we're playing this weird game of like, is what I'm going through right now because of what I'm doing right now? Or is it because there's something that happened in the past? But if it's because something of that happened in the past, then where on earth do I even begin?
Yeah.
And it's something that can get very overwhelming. So I want to ask you a little bit, for anyone that has to go under the rug and knowing that there's a lot that's been swept underneath there, especially, I said, like in my family, a lot gets swept under the rug, especially when it comes to the topic of money. So it's like when it could be so much easier to just turn a blind eye and let things keep getting swept underneath. So how does one prepare themselves mentally to even start to look under there without getting overwhelmed at their first glance?
Oh man, I love how deep we're going in just such a short amount of time. Somebody told me really young, they're like, hey, Shang, when you're vulnerable and honest, that's actually when you're the strongest. I was like, that makes no sense. I'm like telling, either vulnerable with a boyfriend or vulnerable with a best friend. I'm telling you my deepest, darkest like secrets, and I feel like I'm telling you everything that's bad about me. How's that being strong in any way? And then another way they put it, they're like, look, the stuff you don't like about yourself, the stuff you don't like about your life, you think it's dark. You think there's something wrong with it, right? And when you're vulnerable, all you do is you shine a light, and you're shining a light into your soul, into your life, and brightening it over time and allowing you to be more okay with it and just say, the past is past. You can't change the past. We're going to embrace that past, but we're also going to say, I am enough. I love myself for who I used to be, who I am today, and I'm also going to love the future me. They're all versions of me that deserve love. And when we operate out of that self-love, then I think there's a lot less fear we feel and a lot less shame that we feel about ourselves that can allow us to step into the abundance and wealth that's waiting for us in the future.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up. And with vulnerability, it's one of those things where a lot of people have this bravado, this ego, this persona that they put on, this shield that they put on to make them seem as if, they're so strong that they can handle the world. And I guess when you have a scarcity mindset, I could see why you would need that to survive. But when you're thriving, when you know that you'll be okay, and when you know that, you're in a safe space to share and be vulnerable, as you said, is one of the most courageous things that you could do, because that abyss, as we like to say, right, that darkness is something that we all have, and it's something that too many of us neglect, and we try to really disassociate ourselves with all the negativity that we may have suffered or experienced in our lives. And you mentioned one point that it's literally just on the tip of my tongue and it's slipping my mind about, oh my goodness, right after you were talking about vulnerability, I had it on my mind, but it slipped my mind. So we're going to just keep going.
Sure.
So looking into these deep rooting things, right? You said that being vulnerable, finding someone to be vulnerable with. So what was that for you in your life? What helped you tap into that vulnerability? Was it that friend that shared with you the quote, or what helped you find the courage to tap into that vulnerability to start attacking some of these things? Because as you mentioned earlier, right, it could go, the wrong way very quickly because we're trying to do the opposite of something, but we never actually understood what our parents had gone through. And then once we actually start going in there, then we realize like, hey, it wasn't actually this, but something else that caused this. And it's just this giant, like, big old mess that gets kind of tangled up in there. So like, what was it like for you? What walk us through what you did to kind of help us get yourself through that vulnerability?
Yeah. I would say in my teenage years, I relied a lot on church, actually on Jesus. I'm a Christ follower. Then I would say I made more of a mistake in college in that I overly relied on my friends to be that for me. And then I think at one point I read it or some friends said to me, look, like, we can't solve your childhood issues. You got to go to therapy. And then eventually when I got married, my husband said the same darn thing. He's like, you got to get into therapy. I didn't get into therapy until my first year of marriage. So this was, I would say 2013. So by that time I was, 28 years old. I didn't see a therapist until I was 28. And gosh, that first session, I just like bawled my eyes out over, stuff from my childhood. And then it all made sense. I realized ultimately you need to have a safe space, but other humans are human. And it's very easy to get betrayed or just lose trust in other friends, other family members. Eventually, you need to rely on either a community. So you just have a lot of people there. And as you said, it's a numbers game. When you have a lot of people to support you, the burden's kind of shared. And second, you should also seek out professionals, depending on whatever it is that we're dealing with. First one, the community I love because thankfully we're now in a post-COVID world. We can meet again in person. That person-to-person interaction is so important to create the support and trust that you need to become more vulnerable. And sometimes it means going to a new community that's separate from the one you grew up with. But I do think in many cases there are issues and things that you could just use professional help with. So I went to therapy because mine was truly a deep-rooted childhood trauma-related things. I'm a financial coach. Like I help other people with their personal finances because I see the same personal finance questions over and over and over again. So I have a pretty good sense of how to help someone with personal finance. I went to physical therapy when my body wasn't doing all that great during pregnancy. So yes, like somebody who can actually help you heal your muscles and figure out your pain. Yeah, you go to them. You don't go ask your mom how to, heal from muscle pain unless your mom's a physical therapist. So learning to identify the right support and going to them, I think was key throughout my years of, trying to do it myself and realizing actually no one does it on their own.
Yeah. And kudos to you for realizing that and taking action on that. Because it's one of those things where it's like, for me, I was always taught of the mindset of never ask anyone for help, like to keep everything to myself, to figure it out kind of type of thing. So it's like coming into this space and realizing, and it's such an ego hit coming into entrepreneurship, thinking you could do everything on your own, and just to realize that, hey, you actually can't. Like life smacks you up really quick when you come on thinking that, hey, I could do all this stuff, run this super successful business and not burn myself out and not lose all my friends and not lose, my life around me, be trying to do it all myself. So let me ask you, when it comes to, you mentioned too a little bit, going outside of your community, for those of us that are starting to get into this, we'll quickly realize that, especially at this age, that most people don't care about this topic. Most people are still, thinking about the next party, the next, hangout, the next spot to go to, not really thinking about life. Even the ones that aren't, necessarily going to the bar every weekend, even most people at this age aren't really thinking about like, hey, like, what kind of stock can I invest in? Hey, let's talk real estate. Like, it's not a casual conversation that takes place at this age group yet. So for anyone that is looking for that community, what advice can you give me or give my listeners in terms of like the benefits that come with finding a community of people that understand? And I want to talk too about conferences as well, because that's how I find my communities. Like going to conferences, that just like, I was at like an all-time high. Like it felt insanely unreal being in a room of people that just genuinely understood kind of how I felt and how I viewed the world. Not exactly alike, but then also realizing that there's people that are just big-minded thinkers that just want better, just want to help each other grow. So, and on that community aspect, what are some of the benefits? What can people look forward to when finding like a community?
I'll say the very first community that I had to seek out that's completely different from what I grew up with was an entrepreneur community. Now, I did go to Harvard. I mean, plenty of Harvard people eventually go on to found successful companies. Most of the time, it's because they had good backing. They had great 9-to-5 jobs like the management consulting job that I had. Very few Harvard people like really just like completely start from zero. They've always had some professional support. Whereas when I left college and I had my management consulting job, I wanted to start my first business right away. I just wanted to do that. All my other friends like, just collect your high paycheck and, live life. Why you want to, go into something where you have very little experience? And I just had that desire. And luckily for me, it was meetups. I mean, meetups are some of the lowest cost ways to find people who have similar things that you like to do. Now, there is literally a website called meetups.com. I don't know if people can use that, but there's like groups on social media that you can join. And a lot of times they also host in-person events, conferences. I did pay to go to a conference. I also paid to go to regional meetups. I have my own group of like strong girlfriends who all did wedding photography, and we always met on like Tuesdays and Wednesdays because we all worked on the weekends because that's when weddings happen. So you get like happy hour Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
That's amazing. My first big community that I joined was this called Pivot Shift Ahead. One of the real estate agents in my office, she pretty much dropped a couple of links in the chat. And a month later, I finally was like, let me change up my morning routine. And I hopped in there, and that community welcomed me with open arms and opened up so many doors that I never knew were even in the picture before I got into this entrepreneurship game. And a lot of these people I'm still in very good friends with. And some of these people actually became paying students of mine. And it's just crazy to think back, like how everything would have turned out. So you found communities. And then from there, what was your next big lever that really helped propel you in terms of, entrepreneurship, personally, professionally? Like what helped, propel you forward aside from the communities? What were some of the other things that helped push you up?
Well, you got to offer a product that people want to pay for profitably.
Yeah.
So obviously my first year, I way underpriced. In the next 2 years, I quickly raised my prices up to market rate. As you learn in economics, demand and supply equals price. And then I learned how to sell, because I was like, you can be the best photographer in the world, and if no one knows what you do, you're not going to make a sale. And as I realized, it was actually sales and marketing that made a difference when it came to entrepreneurship, not so much the product. I mean, the product needs to be good to some degree. My photos did not suck. They were good. But I quickly learned, and this was the mid-aughts. So I started my photography company like in 2008. So going into the teens. So back then it was search engine optimization for my blog. It was knowing how to use a Facebook page. Those were the two main social media things. Then later on, over time, I learned, this is not for photography anymore, but for my other entrepreneurship efforts, I had to learn Instagram, which is the main thing that I'm on currently. Eventually, I'll be branching more into video, not so much TikTok, because I got issues with the Chinese government, but definitely video of some kind. And whatever platform will be of the future, you just got to constantly know how to evolve and change. I think that is what ties it all the way to my childhood, where I'm like, I moved 10 times in 10 years. Well, we're going to be changing platforms in the future. There may no longer be an Instagram and TikTok 10 years from now. You got to be where people are moving to and be okay with that.
100%. So let me ask you, right? So you started off your wedding photography and you mentioned that you underpriced yourself. I feel like that's a common thing because at least I feel from myself personally and a lot of other people that I know my age, it's usually because we're so young. When you get into entrepreneurship, we kind of have this, this, what's it called? Imposter syndrome. And so we think that because we don't have as much experience that we can't charge what we want. And so let me ask you, so for anyone that's looking to start an entrepreneurial endeavor, like a little one, to just get by, get their feet wet, dabble a little bit, what are some of the mistakes that you would have avoided had you known what you know now when you first started your wedding photography business?
I think it's okay to underprice yourself just to get your feet wet. Like, you got to convince somebody to pay for your product or form a part of her portfolio. So it's always okay to start out, but don't stay there. That's the thing. So I got enough low-paying clients. Some of them were pretty good looking. I mean, that's kind of key. To form a great photography portfolio, people buy what they see, and then you keep going up from there. For Save My Sense, when I didn't know how I wanted to teach or what it had to look like, I experimented with a ton of things. I experimented with a longer term coaching than what I offer now. I experimented with a Microsoft Word based course. I mean, very ugly, very rudimentary. Now I do courses that like combine video and PDF and private community. I still do coaching, but it's very high end. Like I charge upwards to $1,000 for like a coaching plan that comes with a 1 hour call. So it's very different than how I started out with. And I tend to see the beginning years of entrepreneurship more as experimentation, trying things out, and try not to put so much pressure on yourself to reach some unrealistic metric. Like for me, a goal that I really had was like 100,000 followers on Instagram, and that crossed this year. I was like so excited.
I've seen that not too long ago.
Yeah, and I mean, for some people it happens overnight. For me, it took 6 years to get here. You know what? I got here, and I'm super darn proud of that. I don't need to have a meteor like rise in everything that I do. You just gotta like enjoy what you do, and I think that's more important to not having burnout. And I learned that lesson very young because I was working on internet startups in my 20s, and because I went to school at Harvard, a bunch of my friends already got on those like Forbes 30 under 30 lists. I was like, that's my goal. Like I'm gonna be on Forbes 30 under 30. I mean, plenty of those people end up being frauds, but whatever. That was my goal. At age 29, it was pretty clear I was not going to make Forbes 30 under 30. I was so disappointed in myself. I was like, wow, like I'm not successful. I didn't make good use of my Harvard education. I didn't make it. And then I was like, Shang, like, where's that coming from? How many of your friends are truly Forbes 30 under 30? Not a lot of them. And there's, more than 1 billion people on this planet. Like, why are you just so stuck on this one magazine title? And that's when I realized imposter syndrome is in our heads. It's us putting extremely unrealistic pressures on ourselves. And the only person who ends up being mad about it is us. Like nobody else cares. It's really just all in our heads.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because it's something I realized I had. But it's so tricky because it shows up in so many different ways. So like for me, I never thought I had it because it didn't show up in a way that most people have it. Like, oh, I don't think I'm good enough. It's like, I know I'm well qualified. I know I'm well, capable of making something happen, and I'm hardworking and I'm willing to put in the extra hours, and, I'm driven and I'm passionate, I'm charismatic, I have all the traits. But what it showed up to me, imposter syndrome, was I didn't know this. So part of having imposter syndrome is that you always have a next goal post. And so I am constantly putting more and more on my plate, pretty much to my own detriment. And I didn't realize that until a couple of weeks ago from the time we're recording this. I went to a conference last month in March. And literally I was there in a conference. And of course, to be a little frugal, I stayed at the hotel across the block, right? Because the hotel, the conference hotel was a little expensive. So I'm walking back. It's about a 10-minute walk. It's Orlando, so it was nice and warm. I didn't mind. And so I'm walking back. It's about a 10-minute walk. And each time I'm walking back, I'm just thinking to myself, like, am I a fraud? Like, what am I?
Walk of shame.
Because everyone, walk of shame. Every night. I was there for 3 nights back to back taking walks of shame. And just like every night, because everyone in that group, that's like all the people I know in real estate. And so although I'm not actively practicing real estate, I teach a lot of them social media marketing classes. And like I switched more so from social media to more like marketing principles that I learned from like direct response marketing. But it's like just helping realtors. And it was like, they're all like, John, you're doing amazing. John, you're so young. You're doing great. And it's like, as I said, I'm still in my beginning stages. I'm still just barely catching my stride. Like it's still super rough for me. And so it's like what they were telling me and what my bank account and my reality looks like weren't really aligned. And it was just every time I took this walk, it was just like this big like thing just tugging at me like, hey, John, like, you're not what they think they are, right? You're not living up to them. It's like, I was like, oh, shoot, I got imposter syndrome. And I looked up, like, I looked it up on Google. I was like, oh, this wasn't appearing in a way that I normally thought it appeared. So I thought I was immune to it. I thought I didn't have it. And it wasn't, as I said, to the little walk of shame that it came very evident, very clear. And now it's like, now I know it's something I need to work on. But similar to what we talked about earlier with the looking under the rug, it's because I was willing to look under the rug, and then also okay with not turning a blind eye to it, that allow me now to be able to work on it. And now I know, like, if I ever start putting too much on my plate, that's the, imposter syndrome creeping in back into me and trying to take control.
Yes, absolutely. There are days when I'm like, how do I juggle work for Save My Sense with work at home as a mom? It feels overwhelming. And by the way, I don't have an instruction book. Like nobody taught me how to be a mom to 2 kids because my mom only had me. And she said I was a pretty easy baby. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so overwhelmed. And I'm always on Google, always trying to find answers. And I'm like, no, my baby doesn't do that. It doesn't follow this direction. So
yeah.
Then all my mommy friends like, look, Shang, it's just chaos all the time. Just accept that it's chaos. I'm like, oh, okay. If I accept the chaos, I feel a lot better about myself.
Yeah. I really enjoyed our conversation today, man. Where can we find you at? I know you're at Save My Sense on the IG, but where else could we find you at? Where could we go to, just consume more of your content, learn from you, grow with you, and just be a part of your journey? You're one of the, at least from what I've seen, one of the most transparent, vulnerable people I know on social media. And you're, share your journey, which is amazing because it makes it a lot more relatable. So where could we find you at? Where could we connect with you at if we wanted more of Save My Sense and what you have going on?
Oh, thank you. My main home is Instagram. So IG is Save My Sense. And I do offer subscriptions and newsletters for people who want like more play-by-play look of how I do things, or if you just want to read emails, I got that for you too. It's all on my link in bio. I'm also on savemysense.com. That houses, I would say, some of my like longer articles and stuff, and you can learn more about my coaching and courses that way. But really, like, I'd love to help people with as much of my free content as possible, because I want you to keep your dollars too and grow them.
100%. And so now it's time for our rapid fire round. Famous 5 questions, a question we ask every single podcast guest. So I'm going to come out swinging. Question number 1, what is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
I think it's got to be that lesson of don't push yourself to impossible levels of perfection. Like, just love yourself for who you are. It's so important.
What is the most admirable trait a person can have?
Resilience. That is something that I saw in my husband when I first started dating him, was that no matter what failures come your way, injustices, just bad people, that you handle all of those situations and say, I'm going to bounce back, or I'm going to bounce back and go higher and be even better. And that's a huge trait of success.
If you had to change someone's life with one book, which book would you recommend?
Ooh, that's hard, John. Can't think of just one. I have so many. Okay, I gotta say, the book that really changed the way that I thought about money, even though it's a little bit outdated, is Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Rob Kiyosaki. A lot of the real estate stuff he talks about in the back end don't quite work, at least with the real estate environment these days. But the first half, where he talks about how the rich think about wealth versus how like the working class think about wealth, so spot on. So I love that.
What is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind?
You know, I used to say that I just wanted to leave behind like millions of dollars for my kids, but I think what matters to me now is that I change people's lives. And I'm on a mission to change as many people's lives through money as possible, so that someone can say, hey, Shang helped me improve my life and build more wealth for me, for my family. I would love that.
And to wrap it all up, for anyone looking to embark on their walk to wealth today, what is the first step you recommend they take?
First step is save that emergency fund. Make sure you break the paycheck to paycheck cycle as much as you can.
Amazing. As I said, I was looking forward to this, and you delivered at so many levels. So thanks again for hopping on. Thanks again for just dropping the nuggets that you did, and for just sharing, your story, your experiences, the lessons you've learned along the way. I had an amazing time connecting with you today.
Thank you, John.